Hello and welcome to Aussies Abroad, a series dedicated to supporting and connecting Aussies around the globe with inspiring stories from sport, business and entertainment. I'm Darren Bennett, and today our special guest is former AFL player turned champion NFL punter, the great Darren Bennett. This is part one of our exclusive two-part chat with Darren, where we relive his incredible journey from the AFL to becoming the NFL's punter of the 90s. We talk the science of punting. We talk about Darren's favourite Aussies in the NFL. Now, Darren's considered by many to be the godfather of Australian punting, the pioneer of that transition from Australian football to American football, the man who paved the way for other Aussies to follow. He's a fantastic storyteller, so stick around after this episode to get a sneak peek at part two. And if you'd like to listen to our conversation in full, just go to AussiesAbroad.tv, where you can subscribe to our podcast, which is available wherever you get your favourite pods from. Now, without further ado, let's welcome Darren Bennett. Jazz, welcome back to Aussies Abroad. Great to talk to you.
Mate, it's been a while, but it's great to see you. Great to talk to you.
Likewise. Mate, let's get straight into the punting scene. Is it an art or a science? Are you an artist or a scientist?
I think it's a mix of both. I think it's why regular football players who punch each other in the face for a living don't really understand punters and kickers, because they're not sure if it is an art or a science. But I think there's a combination of the two, you know, and luckily for me, coming from Australian rules where football is more of a science, and then going to be a punter in the US where it was more of an art, I sort of have a nice rounded understanding of both sides of it. So, you know, I think there's a lot of science involved in it. I think some people don't want to pay attention to that part of it, but I think it's a combo of the two.
A lot of people might look from the outside and think, well, it's just about having a strong leg. If you can roost the footy, then you can be a punter. But guys like yourself over the years have had lots of conversations, and you compare it more to a golf swing. Why is that?
Yeah, look, and at the moment with our social media profiles, everyone comes out and there's always that one guy. You know, there's a kid, Tyler Newsom right now, hit a 5.9 60-yard punt the other week. And everyone's like, oh my God, why is he not in the NFL? I'm going, because to swing as hard as it takes to kick a 5.9 second hang punt brings you more shanks than a coach is prepared to live with. So that's why the kid's not in the NFL. He just got himself on another practice squad because he's super impressive in practice. But if you put him under the pressure of a game or in weather challenges, he can't repeat it every time. And so that's the hard part. Everyone who plays golf as badly as I do has the most beautiful practice swing ever. And you go, oh yeah, that's great. Now let's hit a golf ball, and I shank my drive all over the place. And that's really the difference between the two, is being able to do that when the crowds are there and when the noise is there and the distractions are there, being able to shut it out. And I think actually golf is going through that right now. There's a lot of young guys who I think probably wouldn't be up in the top 10 in the PGA Tour if there was people heckling them from 6 feet away. But because there's no crowds, these guys are talented and they're cruising up into the top 10 of some of the PGA events. But it just takes 5 or 10 people to tell them that they suck, and they lose 10 shots in a tournament. So, I think it's a lot like a golf swing.
Everyone's chasing perfection. What's considered in college football and NFL ranks as being an acceptable success rate? How many of your punts need to go exactly where you want them to?
I would say 7 out of 10 in college, and 9 out of 10, or, if you hit 95 punts, if you shank more than 5 punts in a season, you're pretty much done. So, it's a under 5% success failure rate.
So it's better to be consistently good than occasionally great.
Correct. And when we teach guys, we always go, that's a fantastic punt, that's awesome, but you need to be able to do that 8 out of 10 times. And so what we try to do is we dial their effort, their extension, their power back to 80%, and go, just live with an 80% punt. 80% of your perfect punt, but that eliminates the 20% punts they're the ones your coach remembers.
So the mental side of the game, obviously very important. And it's different to Australian rules football, isn't it? When you're playing Australian rules football, you're engaged in the game 100% of the time you're out on the ground. But in American football, as a punter, whether it's college or NFL, you're sitting on the sidelines for the vast majority of the game. You've got to make sure you're not living in your own head, and you're ready to go at that moment, whenever it comes, that you tapped on the shoulder and said, right, now it's you.
Yeah, I sort of liken it to sitting on the interchange bench. someone takes a mark 60 metres out, and they run you off the bench, give you the ball, and go kick me a goal, and then go back and sit on the bench again. And I mean, you just would never do that in AFL football. You're sort of more involved in the flow, and you're also, I think, it puts less pressure on you, because if you screw up a kick, you can run 60 yards and go get the ball back and have another effort at it. Whereas here, the second it leaves your foot, your job's effectively over.
So how do coaches and mentors teach punters that side of the game? It's one thing to teach the technical side, the physical side, do this, do that. You're a little bit too much here, let's tweak that. But what about the mental side? How do you learn that? Is it just experience?
It really is. And it's practice and repetition. You know, when guys are struggling mentally, you always go back and say, look, lean on the thousands of punts you've had in the off season. Lean on those days when the wind was blowing, when you really didn't want to punt into it, when it was too cold, when you felt like you were struggling. Just go back to the technical side of it and rely on that. Forget about the situation in the game, the yard line, what you need to do. Just execute that punt. And I think really repetition is what a lot of these young kids need, with a bit of technical assistance, because the Aussie rules leg swing doesn't really translate into an American game. It does at the college level, but it doesn't translate into the NFL game. And if you look at even the guys that have come across that have primarily drop punted in college, they've changed their leg swings a little bit to get, you know, the consistency and the hang time required to play in the NFL.
What percentage of punts, and I know it's all situational now, but what percentage of punts, if you're trying to get from college to the NFL, how many drop punts out of 10 could you survive on being an NFL punter? I know Benny Graham, by the time he was at the end of his career, almost was exclusively kicking drop punts. He was exceptional at it.
He was. Unfortunately, he was 32nd in the NFL doing it. And that was why he only lasted 7 games at Detroit. You know, I know Aaron Sipos is trying to do it right now. I honestly, so here's the thing. The spiral has to set up the drop punt. So if you're an exclusive drop punter, there's ways that coaches have developed to make you less effective doing that in the NFL. And in college, you can hold onto the ball and you can roll out. And a lot of the guys like Max Duffy and those guys are doing it very successfully in college. They just don't have the hang time required to hit it out of that punt all the time. So if you look at the guys like Cam Johnson and Michael Dixon and Locke Edwards when he was at the Jets, they used the drop punt as a change-up punt. So they hit a long spiral to the right, which makes the returner honor that 60-meter punt so that they can hit a 42 to the left by walking the same steps and pulling it back. If you just hit just drop punts, you really, you know, your time is short in the NFL. No one can survive that. And the reason is right now it's 75 degrees. And so I could go with my bent legs out and hit a 50-yard drop punt right now, but try and do it in November in Buffalo, it's going 12 yards. And that's the problem. You have to be able to cut a spiral into that wind on those days later in the season when the wind and the weather challenges you.
Talk us through the evolution of the drop punt or the pooch punt or the rugby punt or the end over end. It seems I've got an endless amount of names for it over there. You started bringing it into the game back when you were at San Diego, but guys like John Madden at the time thought they were mishits. You weren't doing it on purpose till you set him straight.
Yeah, they were. So in my first year, we had a really rough day of a big sea breeze in San Diego, and Coach Ross wanted me to hit just easy punts down the middle, 40 to 45 meters, to set the returners up because they were trying to set lefts and right returns. So I'm like, well, you know, at the time, I would have either bombed a 70-meter spiral over the guy's head or I would have mishit the punt. So I'm like, I'll just hit drop punts. So after about 3 or 4, he came up to me and he's like, you all meaning to do that? Hit it end over end? And I said, yeah, I'm just trying to be consistent 45. And he goes, well, man, you're screwing up my drill. Hit me spirals. And that was the end of the drop punt for me in my first 2 years. And so then when I went to NFL Europe, I had a guy named Al Luganbill, who was the coach at San Diego State, who was my head coach in Amsterdam. And he said, I've seen Aussie rules before. Show me some of your punts that would work in our game. And I'd already been experimenting with hitting it inside the 20. And so I used it in 1995 in the NFL Europe, and then came back, still had the same coaches at the Chargers, and they didn't let me do it. And then David Wing had been at Detroit the year before, and Frank Novak was the special teams coach, and he came up and he goes, man, I had this guy, David Wing, and he used to hit all these punts, and can you hit them? And I go, yeah, sure. So, and I said, I hit this in NFL Europe, And I showed him, and he goes, man, we're using that thing. And I started using the drop punt from then on. And you're right, after about 3 or 4 years of doing it, John Madden came up and he goes, Bobby Bethard told me you mean to do that. And I said, I do. And he goes, well, hell, why didn't you tell me? I could have been talking about it 3 years ago. I kept saying, oh, that's a knuckly ball, but it went to the 5-yard line. That was lucky. And
so you had a lot of lucky punts there, Daz, for a few years, didn't you?
Well, and that's really what it's done for the game is we used to try and aim for the 10-yard line. Well, now these guys aim for the 5, the 6, and they try and roll that. It's an easier ball to down when you're one of the guys running down, the gunners, because it rolls forward, straight, backwards, or straight up in the air. Whereas the spiral, if it bounces on the point, can go anywhere. Yep. Now, any punter in the world that tells you he can mean to make it spin back is full of it. He's lying. But there are certain ways that you can hit that punt to lessen the chance of it running into the end zone, and it's a much easier punt to teach guys that don't know how to do it, how to down the ball. So it's really changed the game, and now you look at the way the guys use it in the rollout in college, and it's changed that game too. You know, a lot of the young Aussies coming across have hit that ball on the rollout, and that's really become a terrific weapon in the game.
The conservatism of coaches was a barrier to entry for Australians for quite a long time. You dealt with it early on and managed to clear that hurdle. But right through the careers of even guys like Ben Graham and Sav Rocker and Matt McBride, who finished relatively recently, overcoming that conservatism, which I think stems from the cutthroat nature of the sport, it's been a major hurdle for Aussies to clear, hasn't it? Because Australian punters would turn up, have a whole range of tricks in the kit bag, but the American coaches weren't comfortable in using anything beyond what they were used to using.
Yeah, and I think, honestly, the evolution in college has been an easier one than the NFL. And the reason is 99% of the coaches in college have no idea about punting. And so you see a lot of the Aussie kids come over and they want to hit spirals because their ultimate aim is to go to the NFL. And then they go, well, show us what you got. And they go, I'm 4 out of 10 with spirals, but I'm 10 out of 10 with drop punts. And they go, so I worked out very quickly that my best punt may get the coach fired. If I hit a 4-2, 68-yard punt and it gets returned for a touchdown, it may get him fired. So coaches are looking to save their jobs before they're looking to be elite at their jobs. So, and that's really what I was saying before about that 5'9", 67-yard. You're real impressed with it. All the coach is thinking about is, how can I cover a 25-yard punt if he shanks the next one? So really what he wants you to do is hit 40 punts in a row where he never has to worry about getting fired. And really that's what it is. It's a very conservative attitude, but they're protecting their own job. So if you try and show them something new that they've never seen before, I showed Chuck Preefer that punt and he's like, dude, you're good enough at the spiral. You don't need to do that. And I'm like, well, this is more effective. And he goes, yeah, but you're good enough at the spiral. You don't need to do that. So, you know, it's really, but in college, they're like, well, this is really going to help us. And the shield protection has evolved to the point where, you know, guys can now experiment and use punts more. And then you look at Cam Johnson and Michael Dixon and Mitch Wisnowski and those guys, and they've now incorporated some of those punts into their NFL repertoire. And now it's added to their bag of tricks, you know, in the NFL, which is terrific.
And the coaches have caught up to it now in terms of they know how to use it. They've seen it work at college level. They've managed to develop schemes for it. So now it's in their comfort zone.
Yes, and there's still some guys like Cook at Baltimore who still are thinking they know what they're doing, but they're sort of flubbing shanks and just telling everyone that that's their punt. And so everyone looks at him and goes, oh, this is, but then when you look at Cam Johnson, he's doing those punts because he knows how to do them. You know, you look at Michael Dixon, and Michael Dixon sets up, and I can tell you before he even catches the snap, this one's going left, because you can tell the body language of it, whereas the returners, they fool them a lot. We still have some punts that I've seen guys hit that they don't know what they're doing. But they're still doing it, and it's effective because it's sort of a knuckly, ugly, effective punt. But I was telling someone the other night about Brad Wing. When Brad was playing, Brad had a banana kick where he would aim sideways, and he was a lefty, and he'd kick it over the bench. And as soon as it came off his foot, even his own coaches would go, oh, God, he shanked it. And it would bend back over the top of the bench land about 3 yards in bounds, and roll 30 yards along the sideline. But as soon as it went towards the sideline, the returner never moved because he's like, I shanked it. But he did it on purpose. Sav Rocker did a banana kick, which now Johnny Hecker does and a lot of guys do. We called it the over the falls, which was just outside field goal range, and he would hit it with a very fast down spin. And I was talking to Sav about it one year, and Thomas Morstead said, I'm going to do that in preseason. And Sav said, the hell Americans are going to do it first. And Sav did it in preseason just to be the first guy to do it. And he called me afterwards, and he's like, do you see me? I did it. I did the over the falls. And so Johnny Hecker does it with a little banana bend to it that it rolls to the sideline. So guys now, I think there's a lot more young special teams coaches that allow guys to experiment and show them, and their minds are more open to it.
Has it changed the nature of the position? Because previously the punter was primarily seen as a defensive role, wasn't it? We're backed up, we're in trouble, let's just bomb it, get it the hell out of there, and we can set up. It's more about defending your position. But now it can actually be an offensive weapon because situational and positional punting, where you can drop it on a dime somewhere on the field, means you can actually flip the field a lot more effectively.
Correct. And when I used to come home to Australia and do interviews, I said, I'm the bad news guy. I'm the only one on the team who purposely gives the other team the football. And so you try to do it as far down the field as you possibly can, but I'm the only one that actually gives my opposition team the football. So when you see guys like, I always say Johnny Hecker because Johnny's sort of the benchmark in the NFL right now. Johnny has a walk right, spiral left rocket punt that goes about 15 feet off the ground but goes 75 yards. Then he has the banana kick, which goes about 35 in the air but rolls on the sideline. Then he has his regular walk right, drop punt left, and his rocket right and regular right. If you're a returner, you have no idea where he's going to punt the ball now. And so that's where I think even Americans who have learned how to do that, he learned a lot of that from Bruce Reed, who was my special teams coach at the Chargers, and was like, hey, we've seen these punts before. And then Johnny just perfected them. And then he had Tim McMullen, who was an Aussie at Oregon State with him. And so they used to mess around and practice those punts, and Johnny was just really good at them. So, Johnny's a weapon. He's definitely a weapon. You never know whether he's going to hit a 75-yard punt to the left, a 40-yard punt to the right. And so the returners have no idea half of the time, which is awesome. It's, rather than just that spiral right, spiral left, he's got a lot of things to do.
And the more complex punting gets, and it has become, a lot more complex in the last sort of 10, 15 years, in a way that's better for the Australian kids, isn't it? Because we naturally arrive in the US, those who are going over to try and get a college scholarship, with more tricks in the bag already.
They do for college. The hard part is there's no real Sav Rocker leg swings in the AFL anymore. That big, booming, long leg swing. And so a lot of them come over with the want to do it. And obviously there's a few guys that are translating across. But once they show that drop punt, they don't do anything but that drop punt in college. And I still think Aaron Sipos has made a good transition across to Detroit. I think they've put him on practice squad because they're intrigued about him. But I think unless he can hit that spiral late in the season, the fortunate thing he has in Detroit is he has 8 home games in a dome, and then he plays against the Minnesota Vikings that are in a dome, that was Chris Kluwe's advantage every year. But he also plays in Chicago and Green Bay. And Chris Kluwe used to average 31 yards in the outdoors because he was a dome punter. And that's really going to be the difficult thing, is when you get a late season bad weather game, are you just going to have to average 30 yards? It's going to be hard. So, a lot of the guys with this bent over leg swing that they have find it very difficult to hit spirals under pressure. They can do it quietly when they're in practice, but when you see them under pressure, they have technical disadvantages, which allow them to drop punt, but won't allow them to spiral at an elite level anyway.
So you're involved in coaching and mentoring young kids coming through, lots of Aussies. Yep. Are you now spending more time, therefore, focusing on the spiral? It's actually gone the other way around, that we're so comfortable kicking drop punts, we actually need to get better at our spirals to have an NFL career?
Yes. Yeah, and if you talk to an Aussie rules kid, he hasn't hit a spiral in a game for his whole career. So it's a real, they know what it is, and they've seen it on archive football. They've seen Ben Graham hit an 80-metre spiral and Sav Rocker bomb one and me bomb one. But, to actually have the leg swing required to do that, I just think they and the other thing is I wouldn't play in the AFL now. I was a one-trick pony. I was jump, get the ball, and kick it long. But these guys, even at my size, have to be such athletes nowadays. The leg swings change because they're running players more than they are tall positional players. And so that foot has to come back onto the ground really quickly because they've got to go to the next contest. Whereas me, once I'd kicked that ball, my job was done. And so very rarely did I run to the second or third contest. So I think that's developed that sort of rollover leg swing because they're much better athletes than I ever was. And so that's where the difficulty, coming across is. The other thing that happens is I notice a lot of these kids, even some of the kids we coach at the punt factory here, they post these bomb punts, and I'm like, how old was that football you hit? Because that football's 10 years old, and I could go hit a 70-yard punt with a 10-year-old football right now. And so when they get to college, the footballs they see are brand new footballs, and they don't punt the same. And so that's the other thing is I'm like, if we're going to do a workout with you guys and you're going to post that coaches in America can see and you're going to get a scholarship based on that, you have to punt like footballs. You've got to punt footballs that are the same age as the ones you're going to punt in college, because that 55-yard punt is a 41-yard punt with one of their footballs. And so they sort of, kids love to do it because they get lots of likes and friends and all that sort of stuff, but it's really not effective. So we're trying to educate them on all that sort of stuff as well.
We always thought that the trickle of Aussie punters would become a flood, and it has over time, particularly at the college level, but it's now filtering through to NFL level, which is fantastic as well. Where do you see the punting landscape at the moment?
Yeah, look, it's, 2020, who knows? It's, there was no real off season. I thought it was my son Thomas was a graduate at TU this year. He had a couple of NFL teams look at him, but he was a marginal kid. So a lot of those ones they get a benefit of going into a rookie camp for 3 or 4 days in April, and the coaches go, oh yeah, this kid will develop, and we like what we see, and so we'll put him on practice squad or whatever. There was very few guys that got that opportunity this year, and so it's going to back up in the next 2 years. There's going to be a graduating senior class that will come in next year with the graduating senior class that sort of didn't get a real chance this year. Obviously Aaron and some of those guys were the exception rather to the rule, because normally in an off season I would have at one of the teams, they'd have 5 punters in before you got to training camp and pick your veteran and your rookie to go into camp. Whereas this year they didn't even look at anyone, And so the punting landscape, I think, is a more athletic landscape. I think the guys are better athletes now. And like I said before, there's younger coaches at special teams now that are like, show me what you can do and see how it can help us.
And just explain the entire landscape to us, Darren, because it's very, very different to Australian sport. So you go over, you get a college scholarship, you graduate. If you have ambitions of continuing to play football somewhere, really the only place to play is the NFL. So if you don't end up on a practice squad, you're on your own. You're going to have that self-sufficiency of going to a park with some friends, working with a coach or a mentor, and just doing it yourself, sending off tapes and trying to get out on the workout circuit. Explain to us how that whole process works, because it's a pretty tough, challenging side of the sport.
So like Lockie Edwards, for an example, I had a hand in Lock going to Buffalo. I'd been talking to Heath Farwell, who I played with in Minnesota, who's the special teams coach. He went up there to go and try and win that job, but he literally had 2 punt sessions and he was a bit rusty. And so normally you would go in April and you would do OTAs for 6 weeks with them, and then you would go to mini camp, and you would be allowed to sort of ease into your consistency, and they would find out who you were. He was there 5 days and they cut him. And so it was a difficult situation. This is not a normal year. 2020 is not a normal season. Whereas normally Locke would win that job. He'd go and punt for the Bills, and he may punt for them for 10 years. But because they had such an urgency to pick their punter, he didn't really get a shot. Now Locke will get another shot somewhere. He's pretty good, and he's still in NFL shape. Very quickly you lose NFL shape if you're not there. But Locke said afterwards in an interview, he literally been working out with Home Depot buckets of concrete in his garage because he couldn't go to the gym. He couldn't come and see me. I couldn't help tune up his drop and all that sort of stuff, which he normally would do 2 or 3 times in an off season.
Yeah, so, it's like being a golfer and you can't go to the practice range and you're expected to step out on the first tee in the PGA Tour having not played for 6 months.
Correct, exactly. And they want you to win. Like I know you haven't gripped a club for a while, but you're expected to win because you're the only guy that can play. And so it's a difficult one this year. So, the landscape of punting in the next couple of years, I think will be leaning towards mid to older guys because they're more reliable.
Yeah, more proven.
So it's going to be hard for younger guys, more proven. Yeah, as seen by Dustin Colquitt. Colquitt played 15 years at Kansas City, and they said, look, he's too expensive, and immediately went to another team because they're like, we just don't want to, because they have a lot of young special teams coaches, they want veteran kickers and punters to sort of take care of part of that special team. When I was getting older, a lot of the veteran players, we have obviously have a special teams coach, but you run the personality of that special teams, the older guys. And so, rather than have a shaky young kicker or punter, they want veteran guys to do that. So it's going to be harder to get in as a rookie.
One of the extra challenges for an Aussie when you're cut from a team or you're trying to get onto a team and you're on the workout circuit and you're just having to work out by yourself and keep practicing and hoping for an opportunity to go test somewhere, is you can't just go home to mum and dad's and do that. You've got to find somewhere to set up base in the US. Tell us how that entire process works, Daz, because that's another whole level of challenge. And at some point, you've got the sort of clock ticking on you, don't you, when you're an Aussie? You can only stay for so long and chase that dream before the financial realities of, well, I've got to be able to support myself kick in.
Yes, and the other thing is when you're not employed, the visa issues kick in. Depending on how long you're here for, you're not like a kid from Colorado who can just, like you said, go home to mum and dad's and drive the car that you drove when you're at college. And all the guys here, you've either got to buy a car or you rent a car, which is expensive. You got to pay for accommodation, and eventually the INS taps on your shoulder and says, "Hey, you've been here too long. Your visa's going to expire. You've got to go home." So, it is a difficult thing, and Australians are under enormous pressure to be able to get a shot, get in, and see what they can do. So, I think that's always been there. It's been there for the last 10 years, and it won't change. I think Australians are starting to get seen, which is terrific. I think it'll be interesting to see how many guys go through in the next few years. I don't really see anyone in the future that's here at the moment that's really dominating that I think would be the next guy stepping up. And I thought Aaron would struggle, but he's obviously held his own well. And so it's interesting. I think he was probably as good as Jack Fox, but he was learning to kick off, and that was the difference between the two. So I think what they're doing is going, we're going to pick a rookie, and if Jack Fox doesn't work out, we'll give Aaron Sipos a try. So hopefully he gets a shot.
So that added pressure that comes, even when you get an NFL contract, Daz, it's not like Australian sport. That contract can be torn up at any time, and you can look across the field on a Monday or a Tuesday after having a bit of a shaky game, and your team is trying out another punter on the other side of the field to take your job. How do you deal with that constant state of anxiety and pressure that at any moment you could be cut and lose your job?
You embrace it. You have to embrace it, and you embrace it as part of the pressure of the whole deal. And I think it helps you play better in the games, knowing that extra motivation and pressure is there. But people always say to me, hey, was it fun playing the NFL? I said, no, it's not. It's stressful as hell. You fight for your job every week. You're only one miss hit away. If you miss it more than one punt in a game, there'll be 5 punters there on a Tuesday trying out. And when you go in to sit in the cold tub and try and get your legs fresh, look out the window, there's 5 guys that all want your job out on that field. And so that happens no matter whether it's the first game of your rookie season or you've been 10 years in the NFL. That will still happen because it's a what have you done? It's a what have you done for me lately? So it doesn't matter how good you are, you fight for that job every week.
And your special teams coach used to tell you that he had something sitting in the top drawer of his desk, didn't he? Just to remind you?
One-way ticket to Melbourne. Yes, he did. And he said, one day I'm going to open that drawer and hand it to you. And it was a motivation. And that's the other thing that we try to teach, trying to teach the American coaches I work with how to deal with Australians, because they're like, Australians are so casual when it comes to dealing with coaches. And I said, that's because Australian coaches are more interactive with their players, and it's a more free-flowing game, whereas the American game's more structured. It's just do what you punt right. If I say punt right, you got to punt right. And so they go, why are the Aussie kids so relaxed? And I'm trying to teach the Aussie kids that it's a different relationship with an American coach than you have with your AFL coaches as well. So it's a two-way street. The American coach is trying to deal with the Aussies, and the Aussie kids trying to learn about American coaches.
The culture of college football, I think, is probably a little bit more similar to an Australian culture, isn't it? In terms of, it is a club, it is a team, it is that sense that we're all in this together for 3 or 4 years at the very minimum. But at NFL level, it's extremely different. There's a cultural shock, isn't there, for Aussies when they step up into the NFL, which is much more of a cutthroat business and a franchise without the socialization, without the, we all live together and we all spend the off seasons together and we all hang out together and we're all best buddies. Not like that at NFL level, is it?
No, it's really not. It makes me laugh sometimes. The Australian media is like, he signed a 4-year deal. I go, nope, he signed a 1-week deal. You know, that people are like, he signed 4 years. And I'm like, no, he did not sign a one. Yes, Rosemi just said in the background, ask Jordan Berry.
Yeah.
Because, you know, unfortunately, Jordan didn't make the team this year, but he was also too expensive to keep. You know, for his output, he wasn't living up to the amount of money they were paying him. And so he became too expensive to keep. And that happens time and again. Guys will sign a 5-year deal, play 3 years. They'll sign a 4-year deal, only play 2 years. And that's where people don't understand that, you know, when you sign a 4-year deal, as a veteran, you can guarantee a little bit of it if you make the first day roster. But if you don't, then it's week to week. It's week to week. And it's good money week to week, but it's really literally week to week. And it can be week to week for 10 years.
So the key number to keep an eye on when you're looking at NFL contracts is the guaranteed figure, isn't it? And that's the key bit, which is the guaranteed bit is the bit you'll get up front no matter what happens. And then after that, as you say, you're basically on a rolling week-to-week deal. It's a job interview every week. I think Sav Rocker told me that you play one good game, that gets you 2 more.
That's so true. No, he's right. And the other thing is when you get that guaranteed deal, you do a mental math in your head to go, okay, I'm probably safe for 2 years, right? So what you do is you take your signing bonus and you prorate it over a couple of years, and you go, the first year I'll be too expensive to cut. The second year, my first half of the season, but I get maybe 2 years out of my 4. But in year 3, if I haven't lived up to my number in year 2, they'll cut me year 3. So, you know, but you have to play 5 years to earn the right to get that solid signing bonus. So up until then, you fight for it every day.
Tell us about the cultural differences in an NFL locker room to an AFL or any other Australian NRL locker room.
Well, it's exactly what you said, Jace, that, you know, you have that growing developmental thing in an AFL thing where you play juniors against these guys. Australia is so small when it comes to that. Even if you come from Western Australia, you probably played Teal Cup if you're good enough. And you played against guys. I played against Paul Salmon and Damien Burke and all those guys in the Teal Cup, even though I was in Western Australia. And I played with a lot of really good West Australian players. Whereas here, you get thrown into a college football team. You don't know half of those guys. You don't know where they're from. And so when you get in the NFL, it's the same situation. People come from all over the country. You've never met them before. You've probably heard about them and you've seen them play college football, but it's an instant chemistry that you have to try and create. It's not a built thing over 3 or 4 years to be able to go, okay, this guy's getting better. I mean, there's some guys that will be there year to year, but of a 53-man roster, you could lose 27 of them, 25 of them over a year. So half your roster disappears every off season, and you've got to try and blood these guys, bring them in, and bring them onto your chemistry and your culture straight away. And some teams can do it and some can't.
And you've also got this bizarre sort of situation where you're trying to build a team culture. We're all in this together, but literally every week, blokes are getting cut and losing their job from in your team and being replaced by others. I mean, that's got to be difficult to build a genuine chemistry when you're looking around saying, well, the coach is telling me I'm really important and we're all in this together, but next week there might be a different guy sitting next to me.
No, true. So true. I had one of my good mates was a guy named Stan Brock who played 17 years in the NFL. And he came up to me after I made practice squad and he goes, sorry, mate. He said, look, I'm a bit of an asshole at training camp. And I said, why? And he goes, well, you know how many guys I've been friends with over the last 16 years that I woke up one morning, went to breakfast and they weren't there anymore? So he said, I wait until a few weeks into the season to go, all right, I can talk to this guy now. Because he said, it breaks your heart. You know, you work with these guys and you go, oh, I really like this guy. I want him to make the team. And then the Grim Reaper knocks on his door at 4 o'clock in the morning and you never get to say goodbye. He's already on a plane back to wherever he came from by the time you're having breakfast in the morning. So that's a really tough day in training camp when 35 guys get cut one day. And so he said it's really difficult to make friends until you're in the middle of the season and you go, all right, I think this guy's here for long enough, I can now talk to him.
Yeah, it's an amazing culture, an amazing mental strain, and the anxiety and the stress of it all must be phenomenal. Do teams have psychologists and things around to deal with that sort of stuff, or each player is expected to just deal with it in their own way? So bring in your own people, have your own advisors, your own agents, your own mentors, and if you want to see your own people away from the club, you can do that.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, the NFLPA has mental awareness, mental health awareness assistance too, numbers to call. But and we do have psychological people help out, but not on a daily basis. You know, during the season they'll do some mental work and stuff like that, but not someone like when we were at Melbourne. I had John Cheatham, who's a well-known sports psychologist in Melbourne there. John would come in once a week at Melbourne and really work with us. And to this day, when I was home in Australia, I used to hear John Cheatham speak on 3AW and I'm like, oh God, I know that voice. Because I had it in his head, you know. So it doesn't really happen that much. And I said to someone just recently, when the AFL guys used to come and want to go through the Chargers practice facility, they went in there thinking they were going to learn everything from the Chargers, but it ended up being 50-50. The Chargers would learn a lot. Like Paul Roos came in and went through, Neil Danaher went through, and those guys taught the NFL guys as much about the sports science of football that the AFL guys used as they learned about it from the NFL. So it ended up being guys would come back year after year because it was more of a 50-50 thing. We were ahead in dietitians, dietary stuff, mental awareness, a lot of that stuff in the AFL, and then a lot of the marketing stuff, the NFL is just, far and away above. So it was interesting to see because I think the NFL guys got more out of it than they thought they were going to.
So what part does fear play in playing in the NFL? I mean, there's obviously the fear of physical injury, but there's also the fear of failure. There's the fear of losing your job and your lifestyle. That's a lot to be contending with. And I guess everyone deals with it differently. But what part does fear play in all of this?
Oh, it's huge. I mean, it's fear of my backup taking my job. As a punter, you don't have a backup on the roster. But as a linebacker, those young kids that are on special teams are all looking at your number, going, not hoping that you'll get injured, but hoping that you go into a slump and they take over. Or running backs, there's 5 running backs on the team, and they play as a team of running backs, but each one of them, 2 through 5, wants number 1's job because he gets a big check every weekend, So, and there's every running back in America wants that running back's job, and he's prepared to come in at number 5 to get number 1. So, fear is a huge thing. I mean, fear of failure is a big thing too. We're all on a journey to try and be elite at what we do. And so, the fear of failure, for me, it was fear of deportation. I always just used to say to Rosemary, I'm scared we're going to get sent home to Australia. So not that I was scared of going home to Australia, but I just wanted the journey to be our journey, not someone telling me I had to go home. So, it was one of those things that fear was a big thing. It was probably, I would say 50% of our mental anguish every week was fear.
Did you ever get over that?
No, never. Still don't. I mean, it's one of those things you carry with you. It also made me a really bad coach when I started, because I started coaching high school kids and I'd be like, this kid sucks. And I'm like, and Will would say to me, Dad, he's 12, he's 13. You can't hit a 5-second spiral when you're 13. Just back your expectations down a little bit and let the kid develop. But he's 13 years old, so stop it. So I think I learned a lot. Working with elite guys like Ben and Sav and Matt McBriar and all those guys was terrific, but I had a totally different approach when I worked with high school and college guys, and then also the Pop Warner kids. And so it took me a while. Because I'm like, you're never going to go anywhere at punting. And he goes, I'm a surfer who kicks footballs at high school. I don't care, And I'm like, Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, fair point. Fair point.
Yeah.
What sort of money are NFL punters making?
I mean, it's the myriad right now. I think five in the mid 500,000s is the starting wage, but you got some guys up in the 2.5 millions. You got to earn your right to get up into that 2.5 millions, but there's some guys making pretty good money now. So, and it's all proportional. It's if you don't achieve for your team, then you'll be out. So, but I think if you're one of the elite 5 punters right now, you're making pretty good money.
What's the most brutal cut you've ever experienced yourself or heard of?
I had one guy who was our best special teams player at the Chargers, a guy named Johnny Thomas. And we were playing a preseason game that didn't mean anything. And Johnny didn't have to play in this game. And we were playing against the Tennessee Titans at Vanderbilt Stadium. And the lights went off in the middle of the second quarter. And so they were scrambling, trying to work out what the hell to do. We lost all power. They sent us back to the locker room. And Johnny came out, and the very first series we punted, and I knew he wasn't warm, and he blew his ACL and ended his career. And I felt so bad about it because he didn't have to be out there, but he said to me, I want to be out here for you, mate. Let's do this. And he blew his ACL. And so, watching someone do that and put their body on the line for you and then end their career was pretty tough.
We hear journeys like Ben Graham's, which was phenomenal. He was such a successful punter when he came over with the Jets. They were the captain of the special teams. He actually has finally established himself, has a couple of bad games. He suddenly gets cut. I think he got cut something like 3 times from three different occasions in the space of about 8 weeks. But then a month after that, he was playing in the Super Bowl. It just highlights how crazy this business is, doesn't it?
Oh, it really is. And it was funny because he came and stayed with us, and we were over at La Costa Canyon punting on the fields, and Rosemary turns up in the van and she goes, "Where's your phone?" And I said, "It's in the car." "Why?" And she said, "Well, the Jets are calling because they want to bring Ben in because the punter that was there strained his hamstring running down on scout team, and they were coming to play the Chargers on Monday Night Football." And so Ben went and grabbed his phone, called the Jets, and they said, "Where do we fly you in from?" And he goes, "I'm in San Diego. I'll just drive down to the stadium." And so, Ben's journey, he was on a terrific journey with Katie and the kids, and they're a tremendous family. Sav and Rose Rocker are tremendous people, great families. And so to have them us be part of their journey as well was great to watch, and Ben had both those guys had such great AFL careers, and then to go on and extend and play in the NFL I think is pretty cool.
It was amazing for Ben, wasn't it? Because he got cut by the Jets and then picked up the very next week after he has mentioned the guy who replaced him did his hammy. And I remember him telling me that he turned up at the team hotel the morning of the game, and other guys that were on the team just said to him, "Oh, g'day, mate, haven't seen you for a few days." They didn't even realise he'd been cut.
No, that's right. And it's that's the cutthroat part of the game, So it's the funny thing was he left his car at my house and he went home and he said, "Can you sell my car for me?" And I said, "Sure." And he said, calls me and said, "Don't sell my car." And I said, "What are you talking about?" And he goes, "The punter at Detroit just punted down the middle and got it returned for a touchdown. I'm going to Detroit." And I'm like, "All right." And then I shipped his truck to Detroit. I mean, it's such a weird situation when you get cut and picked up, and he got picked up from Australia and had to come all the way back to Detroit to go play for him. So, it's fantastic to watch those guys too on their journeys and see where they go after their AFL careers, because both those guys are legends in Aussie rules football.
And then that same year after he got cut by the Jets for the second time, he got called by the Saints, remember, and they had a game over in London. So he flew to London before the team arrived. The concierge delivered his luggage, but it was for the other punter that had already been cut and was no longer on the team. And then
Steve Weatherford.
That's right, Steve Weatherford. He played one game for the Saints, and then the Saints cut him. And he found out later the only reason that the Saints hired him in the first place to play that one game is because he didn't have a criminal record, so he could leave America, go to England, and come back again.
And they knew he had an active passport, so they could pick him up straight away.
What a fascinating man. Now, that was part one of our in-depth chat with Darren, and in part two, we delve into what makes a great NFL punter. Darren gives his advice to anyone trying their luck in the American football system and talks about where his passion for helping others chase their dream comes from.
And so my last season at San Diego, they drafted Mike Cyphers, and I went into my exit meeting with Marty Schottenheimer, and I said, listen, Marty, thank you very much for having me. Your punting job is taken care of for the next 10 years. We've given Mike everything we can possibly give him. It's time for me to go. And he's like, I've never had someone be so honest in an exit meeting. And I'm like, well, we wanted to make sure that punting job was taken care of. So Steve Christie and I really sort of schooled him up that year. And it's such a great thing to pass your knowledge on, and then you sort of live vicariously through him.
All that and more in part two of Aussies Abroad, Darren Bennett. If you enjoyed our chat, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. And for all the information you need to follow us on social media, just go to AussiesAbroad.tv. Thanks again for your time. I'm Jason Bennett, and we'll see you next time on Aussies Abroad.